In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So we always know when the new Coptic year is around the corner because the 2 Sundays prior are the doom and gloom Sundays. We talk about the ends of the earth. So this Sunday and next Sunday, it's the same gospel. Just today it's from Mark, next week it's from Matthew, but it's the same gospel. So it's doom and gloom until the new year. Alright? But there's something that I do want to focus on in today's gospel. But I want to set it up because before this gospel in Mark, which came from Mark chapter 13, the first 2 verses, Jesus was walking out of the temple with his disciples. They were walking out of the temple, and one of his disciples turns to Jesus and says, "Aren't these buildings amazing? Look at how great they are." And Jesus turns to his disciple, who's admiring how magnificent these buildings were in those days, which are still amazing. And he looks and he says this. He says, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down." So Jesus turns to him and says, "Look, everything you see here, it's all coming to nothing. It's all coming to nothing. All these stones are going to crumble." Which is a huge statement in those days because these buildings took nearly over a decade to build. And so to say the temple is going to come crashing down, that's a big thing. It's a big thing now if you say a building's going to come crash down because people are going to start to say, "Do you belong to..." But anyway, but Jesus is saying that these buildings are going to crash down. Be enamored now, but it's all going to come to nothing. And then he continued to walk, and his disciples, like what he said, resonated in their ear. And curiosity kind of killed the cat because as they walked out of the town, Jesus took them up on a hill, and they sat on a hill overlooking the temple. So they came out of Jerusalem. Jesus said these temples are going to crumble down. They went up on a hill, and they're sitting on a hill that can look at the temple. And 4 disciples had a nice little conversation with him. Anybody know who are always top 3 disciples? Peter, James, and John. Who's kind of like the one who almost made the 3? Andrew, all right? Peter, James, John, and Andrew joined in on this threesome, to make it a foursome, with Christ. And they not cornered him, but they said, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when these things will be fulfilled?" Pretty much saying, like, you just made an unbelievable statement, saying that all these buildings are going to come crumbling down. When's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? We need to know when's it going to happen. And Jesus entertains them, but he doesn't necessarily answer them in the way that they were looking for. They wanted to know, when is this building going to come down? We knew it was, now looking back, we know he was talking about 70 AD with the destruction of Jerusalem. Right? But he doesn't tell them that in the gospel. But he starts off by saying, "Take heed that no one deceives you." If you're asking for when is the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, and he comes in and says, "Take heed that no one deceives you," is the answer you're looking for? No. No. Is it the answer you need? Yes. Maybe not the answer you're looking for, but it's the answer you need. Because what were the disciples worried about? They were worried about something external. They were worried about some political, social event, big thing that was going to happen. And Jesus said, "Wait a second, don't worry about the big picture. Just make sure no one deceives you. Make sure no one makes a fool of you." They were worried about external, and his answer was focused internal. He followed it up, he said, "For many will come in my name, saying that I am he, and will deceive many." He says that people are going to come and say they're like me, but actually not be me, and you guys are going to be fooled by it, and many of you are going to follow down that road. Again, they were worried about external, big picture. Jesus said, don't worry about the big picture. I want you to worry about you. Because other people are going to come and tell you things, and they're going to deceive you. So now the question is, I don't know, how do I know if I'm being deceived or not being deceived? It's always a question. When you buy a car, am I getting a good deal or am I not getting a good deal? When you're getting ready to get married, I'm like, all right? But as we go into big decisions in our life, we want to know, am I being deceived or am I not being deceived? Am I getting like what's right or am I not getting what's right? Read a story of the president of a bank who was told that there was counterfeit money in circulation within his bank. And so he wanted to make sure that he trained his employees to be able to spot counterfeit money. And so he made a big deal out of it. He told them, look, we're closing the banks down. You're going to come to this training session where we're going to learn how to pick out counterfeit money. So all the employees came, they showed up, but when they showed up to the training session, they walked into a room, it had a huge stack of money. And there was a note saying, find the counterfeit bills. And so for a day, the employees went through the money and they handled the money. They didn't have the markers, they didn't have the lights, they didn't have any of those things. They went and they handled the money. And all day long, they kind of went through bill by bill, like, this counterfeit, this is not counterfeit. And they were able to separate the money. They were able to tell that this money was real and that this money was counterfeit by feeling it. He trained them to be so attuned to what real money is like that when they feel fake money, counterfeit money, they can tell this is counterfeit. This is counterfeit. They don't have to rely on markers. They don't have to rely on some machine saying counterfeit, not counterfeit. They learned it themselves. So that when they're handling cash up front at the tellers, they receive cash, real, fake. He trained them. But he made them do it themselves. He said, I want you to spend all day figure out what's real, what's counterfeit. And then when they figure out what's real, what's counterfeit, he brought more money and he said, figure it out some more. So they were able to figure out what was real and what was counterfeit. Were they deceived? No. They figured it out. Why? Because they handled what was real. They handled what was real. You now go to them, you're not going to pull a fast one along because they spent all day real, and got it, this is real, and this is fake. St. John said something similar in his epistle. He said, that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled concerning the word of life. What St. John is saying as he opened up his epistles is saying, like, look, the words that you're about to read come from a place where I have looked, I have seen, I have handled, and I know what I'm about to tell you is real. It's real. It's not counterfeit. Why? Because I've handled it myself. I've handled it myself. St. Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, said something similar. He said, as we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what you have received from us, let him be accursed. Pretty much say, what St. Paul was saying to the Galatians is saying, like, look, I told you the gospel. I shared with you the gospel. It's the gospel that I felt, that I experienced, that I know came firsthand from my experience with Christ. I gave it to you. If anybody's telling you something different, don't be fooled. Don't be deceived. But see, St. John and St. Paul, they're speaking from their experience. St. John and St. Paul, they're like the bank tellers. You tell them a message, real, belongs to Jesus, belongs to Jesus, belongs to Jesus. Get this out of here. I know that this isn't what Jesus told me. This isn't what he taught me. So Jesus looked at us, and he looked at his 4 disciples, and he said, don't be deceived. Don't be deceived. Question is, how do we know, or how do we set ourselves up to not be spiritually deceived? To not be spiritually deceived. In one of my favorite books, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, there's a chapter on that talks about circles of influence. And I'm going to take it and I'm going to adapt it for today because I think it's powerful. Okay? I think it's a really powerful concept for us to talk about, especially when it comes to not being deceived. Because one of the biggest things that deceives us in our Christian walk, in our spiritual walk after Christ, is we're not sure, this is what Christ is saying is, what about this? And I'm not sure, is he leading me here? Is he leading me here? And so many times we can be deceived because we're not sure, is this from you, God, or is this not from you? Half our prayers like, God, if it's from you, give it to me. God, if it's from you, show me the way. But sometimes we still have a hard time saying is it from you, is it from not from you? One thing definitely is what St. John and St. Paul were talking about. Do we handle Christ enough? Do we handle his scripture enough? Do we handle the Bible, read it enough to be able to say, this is from Jesus, this is not? The other thing is that we are very distractible. We are a very distractible society. We get enamored by little things that come into our lives, like, ooh, look at this new gadget, and ooh, there's a new computer, and all this TV, and all these, we become so easily distracted. And we become very distracted spiritually too. And so it's good for us to think about our lives in 2 circles. Circle of spiritual influence and the circle of spiritual concern. Circle of spiritual influence. What is this? This is something that I can directly influence. This is something that I can directly influence in my life. So what can I influence in my life? I can influence how much I choose to pray, how much I choose not to pray. I influence and decide how much I choose to read the Bible. I decide how much I choose to participate in the sacrament of confession or seek guidance. I can decide what sort of attitude I want to carry with me all day long. I can decide so many things about my own spiritual life. Nobody else has power over these things. It's me. Choose how much I read, choose how much I pray, choose who I have as a spiritual father, a father of confession, or a mentor. I can choose the books that I read, I can choose how much to read. All these things influence me. Me, nobody else, me. And it directly puts me in that situation where I am handling God. I'm looking like, is this from you, is this not from you? But unfortunately, we also struggle we get concerned spiritually with a lot of things that are outside of our concern. We worry about, what's so-and-so doing with their spiritual life? How is so-and-so fasting? I wonder what the Pope is going to decide about this issue. You know what? I really hope Abuna's message today is good. I'm really counting on a good message from him today, and because it's the one I'm going to take all week long. Well, those all belong in the bigger circle. You have no control. You don't know if I'm going to come to church and I have a bad day and this sermon is going to be bad. If you're waiting on it, that's a bad thing to hold your hand on. Because you have so much that you can personally influence in your own life that to come and depend on somebody else, or to be worried about somebody else, or to be worried about the next series that's going to happen in church, all these different things, you're filling your life with so many things that you don't have control over. And wanting to make it your spiritual meat and potatoes. Think of it like this. You know those electric fences that people put in the yards? It's the invisible fence, and then they put that collar on the dog? What does it do? The dog's wearing the collar, roaming around the yard, all of a sudden gets too close to the fence, runs back. We need a spiritual collar like that. We need a spiritual collar. So that when we start to worry about, I wonder what so-and-so, how many times they've gone to confession. Can you imagine what it's like during the fast? Look at what so-and-so's eating. We would be shocked with the number of times we get so concerned about somebody else and what they're doing, when really if we focus on our own circle of spiritual influence, which is me, that puts me in a position to handle Christ. To look at him and say, this is for me. This is where you're leading my life. This is what you want me to do. This is how you want me to forgive. This is what forgiveness feels like. And we'll be able to tell that no, this anger I'm about to spew, that's counterfeit. This kind of willy-nilly off the hip, yeah, I forgive you. Jesus is going to say, no. That's not how we do forgiveness. It's not how I taught you forgiveness. So for you, and for me, I actually have like a circle of concern and a circle of influence. It's something that I write down and I look at and I remind myself. I remind myself that when I look at certain people, I'm like, no, when I worry about this person, this is in a circle of concern. It's going to distract me. What can I do? I go back to my circle of influence. I say, this is something that I can do that focuses on it. It helps me stay focused. If we were to write this out, if you were to go home, draw 2 big circles on a page. Okay, one circle inside, and then the bigger circle. First start with the circle of your spiritual influence. What are the things that you can do that directly influence your spiritual life? You are not depending on somebody else. If you are depending on a series, circle of concern. If you're depending on a good talk every Sunday, circle of concern. You put in that circle, what do I do personally? Okay, what do I do personally that falls in my circle of spiritual influence, which I'm influencing me and my relationship with God? I'm not concerned with everybody else. And when your mind starts to wonder, I wonder what so-and-so is doing. I wonder what this community is doing. I wonder how that person is fasting. I want you to put a spiritual dog collar on you and shock yourself. It's not a thought for me. Not a thought for me. Be focused. Jesus said, don't be deceived. Avoid deception through spiritual correction. Avoid deception through spiritual correction. When we correct ourselves and say, this is about me and my relationship with God and my personal knowing of Him, that is my focus, then I avoid being deceived from all the things that are around us. And there's tons of things around us. But Jesus warns us today, don't be deceived. Many will be deceived. And if we don't have a game plan, count on being deceived. But if we have a game plan, we have something that reminds us continually, don't be fooled. Don't worry about this. This is not your worry. This is not your concern. We allow God to worry about those things. We allow God to be God. And we allow ourselves to now focus our energy and our time on Him. And He says, when you know me, and I really love the words of St. John, that which we have seen, that which we have handled, it was there, it was personal. He knew what the real Jesus was. And He knew how to say everything else, that's not Jesus. Don't be deceived. Let's handle our life. Be personal. And don't forget your spiritual dull color. Day in and day out. And have it as a reminder. That's not for me. This is for me. And glory be to God for that. Take our moment of silence and we'll